Ben Johnson just scorched the entire Chicago Bears offense, threatening to bench multi-million-dollar starters after a disastrous penalty-riddled practice at Halas Hall. The Chicago honeymoon is officially over after repeated pre-snap flags and botched exchanges pushed the head coach to unleash a furious tirade, putting every single offensive star directly on the hot seat. This explosive meltdown forced Caleb Williams into a high-pressure 2-minute drill response, proving that raw talent alone will no longer save anyone from accountability. Unlike past regimes who hid behind empty excuses, this zero-tolerance policy delivers an aggressive reality check to an offense expecting a free pass. Here is how one terrifying coaching outburst transformed training camp into a full-blown survival test that could define the Bears' entire season. The August heat at Halas Hall was oppressive, but the true scorching heat came directly from the mouth of the head coach. For months, the local narrative surrounding Lake Forest had been defined by cautious optimism, shiny prospective draft picks, and the sweet promise of a modernized offensive scheme. But benign honeymoon periods have a very short shelf life in the National Football League, and Ben Johnson officially burned that honeymoon to the ground in front of a stunned sideline. What was supposed to be a polished, high-tempo practice session quickly dissolved into an absolute operational disaster, defined by basic procedural blunders that left the coaching staff utterly furious. The afternoon started with a sequence of sloppy execution that you would expect from a middle school program, not a professional roster aiming for a post-season push. Repeated false starts instantly deadened prospective drives before they could even get off the ground, killing all natural offensive rhythm. To make matters exponentially worse, center-to-quarterback exchanges were routinely botched, sending footballs tumbling across the turf and forcing coaches to blow whistles in pure frustration. The huddle discipline was virtually non-existent, as play calls took far too long to digest, resulting in delayed snaps and pre-snap panic that completely ruined situational drills. Each time the offense aligned incorrectly or crossed the line of scrimmage prematurely, the atmosphere on the practice field grew noticeably heavier, building toward an inevitable high-yield explosion. When the final horn sounded to conclude the disastrous period, Ben Johnson did not retreat into the protective comfort of vague coaching cliches. Instead, he gathered the entire roster and delivered an unvarnished, direct, and furious reality check that echoed across the practice fields. He made it crystal clear to every player standing in that huddle that sloppy, undisciplined execution would simply not be tolerated under his watch, regardless of a player's contract size or draft status. His message was sharp, precise, and downright intimidating. If you cannot line up correctly, communicate cleanly, and execute basic procedural duties, you will be left on the bench when the real games begin. He explicitly called out the offense for its total lack of focus, publicly declaring the collective performance completely unacceptable and thoroughly embarrassing for a professional organization. The traditional buffer zone that usually protects high-profile starters during the early weeks of training camp was violently stripped away in a single rant. Johnson wanted every athlete wearing a helmet to feel the immediate pressure of job insecurity, signaling that reputation alone will buy zero margin for error this season. This fierce public confrontation signals a monumental culture shift for the Chicago Bears franchise, establishing an uncompromising standard that has been desperately lacking for years. In seasons past, administrative failures and mental lapses were routinely hand-waved away with quiet excuses and promises of future correction during film study. Johnson's fiery outburst proves that those passive days are officially dead and buried, replaced by a ruthless environment where absolute accountability reigns supreme. No single individual on this unit, from rookie contributors to seasoned veterans, is safe from being held accountable for hurting the team's operational standard. The intense baseline expectation has been drawn firmly in the dirt, proving that high-flying talent means absolutely nothing if it cannot manage basic pre-snap mechanics. Every single player left the field at Hallas Hall fully aware that their roster spot and playing time are now attached to absolute discipline and flawless execution. The warning shot has officially been fired across the board, and the entire locker room now knows that the era of comfortable excuses is over. What set Ben Johnson off during that infamous afternoon practice was not a fundamental lack of physical talent or raw athletic ability, it was outright procedural laziness. Across the entire football landscape, talent can mask a multitude of sins. But in Johnson's meticulously designed offensive scheme, execution begins long before the football is ever snapped. During live situational scrimmage sets, quarterback Caleb Williams and the offensive unit repeatedly broke the huddle with far too little time remaining on the play clock. The offense meandered toward the line of scrimmage with a passive demeanor, dragging its feet as precious seconds ticked away into oblivion. Huddle play calls that should have been processed instantaneously were instead met with hesitation, confusion, and sluggish alignment. By the time Williams reached the center to begin his cadence, the play clock was routinely hovering under 7 seconds, forcing the unit into pure operational panic. Drives that were supposed to establish rhythm and offensive momentum were instead repeatedly suffocated by burned timeouts and catastrophic delay of game penalties. In the high-powered world of modern NFL football, burning a timeout in training camp simply to avoid a pre-snap penalty is a cardinal sin that infuriates offensive strategists to their core. In Johnson's system, pre-snap precision and tempo are completely non-negotiable elements of the playbook. His complex system relies heavily on intricate pre-snap motion, shift variations, and rapid snap counts designed to manipulate defensive coverages and expose structural weaknesses. When an offense cannot even line up before the play clock reaches critical red zones, the entire strategic advantage of that offensive architecture is completely neutralized. Instead of dictating terms to the defense, the offense finds itself completely at the mercy of the clock, rushing its pre-snap checks and skipping vital defensive reads. The constant sequence of false starts, illegal formation flags, and improper shifts turned what was supposed to be a competitive practice into an unwatchable exercise in frustration. When you suffer from pre-snap movement penalty after pre-snap movement penalty, you do far more than just lose yardage. You completely destroy the coaching staff's ability to even evaluate the rest of the unit. Coaches cannot properly assess route running, pass protection schemes, or ball carrier vision when a play is dead before it even starts. To make matters infinitely worse, the fundamental mechanics between the center and quarterback were wildly inconsistent throughout the practice session. Snaps were arriving too high, bouncing off the turf, or coming out of rhythm, forcing Williams to scramble just to secure the football rather than executing his progression reads. In an offensive system that demands surgical timing and immediate execution, a botched exchange renders every route combination and blocking scheme totally useless. The frustration on the field was palpable as play callers slammed their clipboards down on the sideline after watching drive after drive stall out due to basic mechanical errors. The offense was repeatedly shooting itself in the foot, turning routine situational drills into chaotic scrambles. This total breakdown in operational mechanics exposed an alarming lack of detail and focus among the offensive personnel. Johnson's offense requires absolute sharp mental discipline, where every player knows their assignment and executes it with crisp, relentless urgency. When players operate with procedural laziness, it undermines the foundation of the entire team and wastes valuable practice reps that are critical for season preparation. For a team harboring serious championship aspirations, failing to execute the most basic pre-snap duties is completely unacceptable. Johnson made it brutally clear that talent alone will never compensate for a lack of mental toughness and procedural discipline. Every player on that offense was given a stark reminder that in this system, attention to detail is the price of admission, and failing to meet that standard will carry immediate consequences. Great teams are not defined by avoiding criticism altogether, but by how violently and decisively they respond when the heat is turned up to maximum intensity. Following Ben Johnson's scorching dressing down on the practice field, the entire demeanor of the offense shifted from passive confusion to sharp, razor-focused urgency. As the whistle blew to signal the transition to Field 1 for the team's signature simulated situational period, the tension hanging over the complex was palpable. The scenario placed before the first team unit was as high stakes as training camp gets, trailing 24-21 with a meager 1 minute and 41 seconds remaining on the clock and no timeouts to burn. In seasons past, a trailing offense rattled by intense coaching might have folded under the weight of the moment, spiraling into further pre-snap chaos and miscommunication. But Caleb Williams stepped into the huddle with a cold, ruthless composure that immediately quieted the sideline noise. The franchise quarterback understood that the entire identity of this offense was being tested in real time, and the only acceptable answer to Ben Johnson's fierce public challenge was pure, unadulterated execution on the turf. From the very first snap of the 2-minute drive, the procedural glitches that had plagued the team earlier in the afternoon vanished as if they had never existed. Williams operated with commanding pace, barking out pre-snap adjustments at the line of scrimmage while keeping his eyes locked firmly on the secondary. He instantly opened the drive with a crisp, timing-based strike to the perimeter, getting the ball out of his hands in under 2 seconds to beat the blitz package and set an immediate tempo. The huddle was breaking with military precision, leaving ample time on the play clock for Williams to dissect the defensive alignment without forcing panicked snap calls. Drive mechanics were smooth, crisp, and completely synchronized as Williams sliced through the secondary with surgical efficiency. Methodically driving the unit straight down the length of the field, Williams distributed the football to multiple receivers, refusing to force high-risk throws into tight double coverage. His footwork in the pocket was remarkably calm, despite the pass rush bearing down, showcasing the elite pocket awareness and razor-sharp decision-making that made him a top-tier quarterback. As the clock continued to tick rapidly downward towards single digits, the pressure inside the red zone reached an absolute fever pitch. With the defense hunkered down in tight goal line coverage and the final seconds expiring, Williams delivered the defining play of the entire practice session. Facing a crucial final down scenario from the 4-yard line with zero room for error, Williams took the snap, dropped back under heavy pressure, and bought just enough pocket leverage to extend the play. Seeing second-year receiver Luther Burden III flash open along the back boundary of the end zone, Williams unleashed a fast-spinning, surgical fastball into a microscopic window over the outstretched hands of 2 defenders. Burden dragged his toes along the turf in the back of the end zone, securing the dramatic 4-yard touchdown strike to cap off a thrilling drive and win the situational period. The offensive sideline erupted as the team celebrated the clutch execution, proving that when backed into a corner, the unit possessed the raw talent necessary to conquer high-pressure situations. Yet even in the immediate aftermath of that dazzling touchdown drive, Ben Johnson maintained his stern, unwavering demeanor on the sideline. While the raw execution and clutch heroics from Williams and Burden demonstrated world-class potential, Johnson refused to let a single highlight reel moment mask the systemic flaws that had surfaced earlier in the day. Flashy plays in situational drills mean very little if a team gives away free yardage through procedural laziness on routine snaps. For Johnson, true greatness is not found in sporadic moments of brilliant recovery, but in the relentless, unyielding pursuit of consistency on every single play. Williams showed elite poise under fire, but the mandate from the head coach remains crystal clear. Spectacular individual brilliance must be built upon a foundation of total operational discipline on every single snap. Chicago Bears fans are historically accustomed to a very specific, carefully sanitized media routine during August training camp. For decades, previous coaching regimes approached summer mental errors with a patronizing protective layer of sugar-coated optimism and hollow press conference catchphrases. When past squads stumbled through penalty-ridden practices, former head coaches routinely shrugged off sloppy execution, assuring reporters that the team was simply working through natural camp rust or diligently searching for the root causes behind systemic mistakes. Public press briefings were dominated by vague platitudes about effort, continuous learning, and trusting the process, while blatant operational failures were brushed quietly under the rug. This persistent protective buffer created a comfortable, unaccountable environment where repeated mistakes carried zero public consequences or immediate urgency. Fans grew thoroughly exhausted from watching staff after staff downplay obvious mechanical issues only to watch those exact same pre-snap flags and execution failures derail real games come September. The institutional tolerance for mediocrity had become so deeply embedded within the organization's DNA that soft practice standards were accepted as the baseline norm. Enter Ben Johnson, whose blistering candor and refusal to shield players from public accountability represents a radical, seismic departure from every head coach who came before him. Johnson does not treat press conferences as an exercise in corporate diplomacy or protective public relations. He treats them as a direct extension of his team meeting room. When practice devolves into a parade of false starts and botched center quarterback exchanges, Johnson speaks the raw, unvarnished truth directly to the microphones without hesitation or sugarcoating. He does not offer empty excuses, nor does he hide behind soft coaching terminology to shield multi-million-dollar athletes from hard realities. If the offense plays poorly, he calls it out directly. If veteran starters display procedural laziness, he warns them publicly that their starting spots and roster status are on the line. This level of direct transparency is a breath of fresh air for a long-suffering fan base that has hungered for genuine, uncompromising leadership for generations. Johnson understands that real respect is built on absolute truth, and he refuses to lie to his locker room or the city of Chicago about the current state of his football team. By establishing an aggressive zero-tolerance policy for mental errors during the dog days of August, Ben Johnson is systematically dismantling the losing habits that have plagued Halas Hall for decades. In the brutally competitive landscape of today's loaded NFC, talent alone is nowhere near enough to guarantee success when margins for error are razor-thin. Division rivals and conference contenders do not hand out second chances to teams that gift them 5 free yards through pre-snap confusion or waste precious timeouts before the ball is even snapped. Johnson recognizes that a championship culture cannot be magically summoned on kickoff Sunday. It must be hammered into the bedrock of the program through grueling daily repetition where every single detail is meticulously scrutinized. By holding every athlete on the depth chart to a non-negotiable standard right now, he is forging an identity rooted in discipline, sharp mental toughness, and unrelenting pride in basic execution. This stark contrast in coaching philosophy marks the official arrival of a true championship standard in Chicago, one that prioritizes operational accountability over artificial comfort. Players can no longer hide behind soft practice structures or count on coaches to cover for their lack of preparation. Johnson's fearless willingness to challenge his roster publicly sends a loud, undeniable message across the entire organization. No individual is bigger than the team, and no amount of raw talent will ever excuse procedural laziness. For a franchise desperately trying to pivot from historical irrelevance to sustainable postseason dominance, this uncompromising approach is the exact catalyst needed to elevate the entire program. The era of comfortable August excuses is officially buried, replaced by a ruthless culture where total excellence is demanded on every single rep. Ben Johnson just delivered the exact wake-up call this Chicago Bears offense desperately needed to snap out of its summer complacency. For far too long, potential was used as a substitute for performance at Hallas Hall, but potential doesn't win tight division games or secure playoff victories when the pressure mounts. By holding his offensive stars to an absolute zero-tolerance standard during practice, Johnson is forcing this team to confront its flaws and grow up in real time. We witnessed how Caleb Williams and the unit responded under fire during that clutch 2-minute drill on Field 1, proving that the raw capability is there when focus replaces mental laziness. But as Johnson made abundantly clear, showing up for one late-game drive means nothing if pre-snap penalties and mechanical mistakes kill half the possessions during a full 60-minute game. The culture is shifting right in front of our eyes, and every single player on that roster now understands that their spot on the field must be earned on every snap. Is this fierce, tough love coaching exactly what Caleb Williams needs to make a massive year 2 jump? Drop a comment down below with your thoughts, hit that like button, and subscribe to keep up with all the unfiltered Chicago Bears practice coverage.